Imagine yourself placed not in the comfort of your modern world, but in the middle of a boundless sea, where no horizon feels familiar and the very air smells of salt, decay, and storms. You are drifting in a small wooden raft, nothing but waves on every side, and as your heart begins to pound faster, you sense something shifting beneath you. The water is deep, darker than ink, and each ripple whispers of unseen forces moving in the abyss. This primal fear of the open ocean, the fear that grips your lungs until breathing feels impossible, is called thalassophobia. For many today, it is a nightmare contained within imagination. But in the late Cretaceous, some 85 million years ago, that fear was the absolute truth of daily life. This was the time of the Western Interior Seaway, a massive inland ocean that split North America into two halves, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Arctic Circle. It was not a tranquil sea, not a calm bay where gentle waves lapped at the shore. It was an endless arena, an ecological battleground where creatures beyond imagination thrived, hunted, and died in an endless cycle. Michael J. Everhart in Sea Monsters, Prehistoric Creatures of the Deep, 2005, describes this seaway as a biological hotspot, overflowing with predators so fierce that survival for any creature, no matter its size, was never guaranteed. Mosasaurs, apex predators with jaws as long as a human body, slid silently through the depths. Plesiosaurs, with their snake-like necks, ghosted between shoals of fish. Sharks the length of buses patrolled like executioners, and even invertebrates, like ammonites with curling shells and squids armed with hooked tentacles, could turn from prey into monsters in their own right. Nothing was safe, not even the top killers, because in this ocean there was always something larger, faster, or hungrier lurking in the gloom. If we, as fragile humans, were cast into that sea, our survival would not stretch minutes, perhaps not even seconds. Every sound, every splash, every shadow would be a reminder that the abyss below was alive, watching, waiting. This was not simply an ocean. It was a nightmare made real, an expanse where evolution pushed creatures to terrifying extremes, and where life's only commandment was simple: hunt or be hunted.
Now, close your eyes and imagine yourself descending beneath those waters, deeper and deeper, until sunlight fades and your world turns into a liquid dusk. In this silence, you see movement. First, small, silvery fish darting nervously, then larger shapes gliding with impossible grace. Suddenly, the water darkens as a shadow eclipses what little light remains, and before you can comprehend its form, a massive jaw fringed with dagger teeth surges past. This was the daily reality for the creatures of the Western Interior Seaway. It was a realm where the surface shimmered with the illusion of calm, but beneath it was chaos, violence, and hunger. The fossilized chalk beds of Kansas and South Dakota, which today lie quiet under farmland, are in truth the graveyards of this ancient ocean, preserving skeletons of predators locked in eternal struggle. Paleontologists like Donald R. Prothero, Bringing Fossils to Life 2013, emphasize that these deposits capture not only isolated species, but entire food webs, proof that this was one of the most dangerous marine ecosystems in Earth's history. Imagine the endless chase, a school of fish pursued by Xiphictinus, a monstrous 20-foot fang-filled predator, only to be ambushed by a mosasaur lunging from below. Above them, a plesiosaur darts with its long neck, seizing stragglers, until suddenly it too is seized by something even larger. Every ripple in that ocean carried the threat of death, every moment a reminder of nature's merciless design. Unlike modern seas, where whales sing and dolphins play, This was a sea of silence, broken only by the thrash of combat and the tearing of flesh. To the creatures within it, life was not measured in years, but in seconds. The seconds it took to strike, to flee, or to die. And to us, imagining that world, it stirs a question that is both terrifying and thrilling. If we could stand on those ancient shores and gaze out at that endless expanse, would we marvel at its beauty, or would we collapse in fear, knowing that beneath its shimmering surface lurked monsters beyond our darkest dreams?
When we speak of the Western Interior Seaway, it is easy to picture it as just another inland sea, perhaps no different from the Mediterranean or the Caribbean today. But to think of it in those terms is to underestimate its sheer scale and importance. The Western Interior Seaway was not a mere geographic feature. It was an inland ocean that split an entire continent in two, stretching thousands of miles from the Arctic Ocean in the north all the way down to the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico in the south. It transformed North America into two distinct landmasses, Appalachia to the east and Laramidia to the west. Standing on its shoreline 85 million years ago in what is now Kansas or Nebraska, you would not have seen farmland, forests, or mountains. Instead, you would have gazed across an endless expanse of warm, shallow water, a sea whose horizon blended seamlessly with the sky. Donald R. Prothero, in Bringing Fossils to Life, 2013, emphasizes that this seaway was not a static, quiet body of water, but a dynamic corridor, a channel through which warm tropical currents and colder northern waters mixed, creating one of the richest marine ecosystems in Earth's history. Its depth varied, sometimes reaching over 2,600 feet in the deepest troughs, but in many places shallow enough to resemble vast lagoons or banks where sunlight penetrated to the bottom, fueling blooms of plankton that formed the base of its immense food web. Over millions of years, microscopic creatures like coccolithophores rained their calcium-rich skeletons onto the seafloor, forming thick chalk deposits that would one day harden into the white cliffs still visible across the American Midwest. Imagine yourself standing there then, barefoot on the sandy shoreline of a land without cities, without people, gazing at a sea whose surface glittered under a Cretaceous sun. Beneath those glittering waves, shadows larger than any modern whale prowled silently. It was a world both beautiful and terrifying, full of opportunities for life to flourish, but also full of dangers that could end life in an instant. And so, as you look across this ocean in your mind's eye, ask yourself, would you see only its shimmering beauty, or would you sense the lurking horror beneath its calm blue surface?
The story of how this ocean came to be is just as fascinating as the monsters that swam within it. The Western Interior Seaway was born from a combination of tectonic and climatic forces that reshaped the face of North America. During the Cretaceous period, global temperatures were far warmer than today, and without polar ice caps to lock water away, sea levels rose to some of the highest points in Earth's history, more than 250 meters higher than today, according to Michael Benton in Vertebrate Paleontology 2015. As the Atlantic Ocean widened and the continents drifted apart, massive mountain-building events to the west, known as the severe orogeny, caused the crust to bend and sag under its own immense weight. That sagging land created a basin, and into that basin spilled the waters of the world's oceans. From the south, warm currents surged through the proto-Gulf of Mexico, carrying tropical nutrients northward. From the north, colder waters flowed down from the Arctic, meeting in the center of the continent and mingling in ways that created dynamic, turbulent ecosystems. Over time, this inland sea became a marine superhighway. Imagine swimming alongside an ammonite near the southern edge of the seaway, and days or weeks later, its descendants might be found thousands of miles north near the Arctic. Early seabirds like Hesperornis hunted fish along its length, while mosasaurs, sharks, and plesiosaurs spread freely between environments. Life flourished in the abundance of food, and predators evolved to match the challenge. Yet for all its fertility, the seaway was a place of constant flux. Currents shifted, storms rolled across its expanse, and coastlines crept back and forth with each geological tremor. What might have looked like a stable inland ocean from above was in truth a restless, evolving landscape that dictated where creatures could live, feed, and thrive. If you had been alive then, gazing across its expanse, would you have seen it as a highway of opportunity or a corridor of death where predators from across the world converged?
Still, the Western Interior Seaway was not always a thriving paradise. Its beauty masked a darker truth. It was also unstable, unpredictable, and at times deadly even to the creatures that called it home. The shallow nature of the seaway made it prone to dramatic shifts in oxygen levels, sometimes creating anoxic zones where life suffocated en masse. Peter Ward, in Out of Thin Air 2006, explains how such events could wipe out entire populations, leaving the seafloor littered with the carcasses of fish and reptiles, preserved in the chalky mud. These dead zones, silent and suffocating, became mass graves that today give us windows into the past. Imagine swimming downward into its murky depths, the green water closing in around you, visibility reduced to just a few feet. Your heartbeat quickens as the water grows colder and thinner, until suddenly, below you, the seabed stretches out, covered with pale, lifeless bodies. Above these grim plains, predators still patrolled, waiting for weaker survivors forced into oxygen-starved waters. Mosasaurs ambushed in the gloom. Sharks circled endlessly, and even the graceful Plesiosaurs could become victims if they strayed too far. The ecosystem thrived precisely because of this danger. Plankton blooms led to fish swarms attracted predators, and predators in turn fed scavengers, creating one of the densest, most complex food webs in Earth's history. Standing on those shores today, it is nearly impossible to imagine the American Midwest drowned beneath such perilous waters. But the fossils, bones of mosasaurs, ammonites, sharks, and birds whisper the truth of that vanished world. They remind us that life here was both abundant and fragile, balanced on a knife's edge between prosperity and annihilation. And so we must ask ourselves, if survival in this ocean meant living every day one heartbeat away from death, would we have dared to dive beneath its surface? Or would we have stayed on land, haunted forever by the monsters we could never see?
Among all the predators that haunted the Western Interior Seaway, none commanded more fear than the mosasaurs, the undisputed tyrants of the Cretaceous oceans. These were not dinosaurs, though their time overlapped. They were marine lizards, distant relatives of modern monitor lizards and snakes that had returned to the sea and, in doing so, evolved into some of the most efficient killers Earth has ever known. Picture a Komodo dragon, a creature already formidable in size and ferocity, then stretch its body to lengths of 40 or even 50 feet, replace its legs with sleek flippers, and equip its tail with the scythe-like power of a shark's fin. Add jaws capable of opening wide enough to swallow a human whole, lined with dozens of conical, blade-like teeth, designed not for chewing, but for seizing and dragging prey down into oblivion. That is a mosasaur. According to Michael J. Everhart's Oceans of Kansas, A Natural History of the Western Interior Sea, 2005, fossils of Thalassophobia, one of the largest mosasaurs, indicate a skull alone nearly 6 feet long, the length of a tall man, and built with reinforced bone to withstand violent collisions when ramming prey. Imagine swimming in those ancient waters as a smaller fish or bird. The sea around you suddenly darkens, and before you can react, the blunt snout of a Thalassophobia slams into you with the force of a battering ram, stunning you. In seconds, those jaws open, teeth clamp down, and your world ends in silence and blood. These were not just predators. They were assassins of the sea, capable of bursts of speed, of ambush, of overpowering almost anything in their environment. And in a food web already packed with monsters, they stood at the very top. So here is the question. If you had been adrift in the middle of the seaway, knowing Mosasaurs hunted beneath you, would you have dared to dip even a single finger into those waters?
The terror of Mosasaurs did not stop at their size or speed. It was amplified by their extraordinary adaptability. Their jaws were double-hinged, much like those of modern snakes, allowing them to open at extreme angles and swallow prey larger than their own heads. Fossilized stomach contents reveal just how indiscriminate they were. Bones of giant fish, the shells of turtles, fragments of seabirds, and even the remains of other mosasaurs have been found inside their rib cages. Yes, mosasaurs were cannibals, willing to tear apart their own kind in moments of hunger. Dale Russell, in his monograph Systematics and Morphology of American Mosasaurs, 1967, notes that cannibalism was not rare, but likely a fundamental part of their survival strategy in an ecosystem where food abundance could change with the seasons. Picture a battle between two giants, a smaller 25-foot mosasaur caught in the jaws of a 40-foot elder, thrashing violently as bones snap and blood billows through the water. The victor gulps down chunks of its rival, ensuring its own survival at the expense of kin. This is not cruelty, not malice. It is nature's brutal law laid bare. And in the Western Interior Seaway, that law was written in teeth and blood. Yet mosasaurs were not mindless brutes. Recent discoveries of preserved soft tissue described by Johan Lindgren, Soft Tissue Preservation in a Fossil Mosasaur, 2010, reveal scales and pigmentation patterns that suggest a streamlined, counter-shaded body, much like modern sharks or whales, perfectly adapted for stealth in open water. They were hunters engineered by evolution with chilling precision, ambush capability, relentless stamina, and an appetite with no boundaries. To visualize it, imagine drifting above a green-tinted shoal of fish when suddenly the school scatters in panic. Out of the haze surges a sleek, muscular shadow, jaws unhinged wider than seems possible, teeth glinting in a sliver of sunlight. Before your eyes can even register the shape, the water explodes in froth, and the shoal is gone, vanished into the abyssal stomach of a mosasaur. So reflect. In a world where even the top predator could turn on its own, would survival ever have felt secure, or would every breath be shadowed by the fear of betrayal and attack?
Perhaps the most haunting truth about mosasaurs is not just how they lived, but how they shaped everything around them. The ecosystem of the Western Interior Seaway bent to their dominance. Fish evolved to swim faster. Plesiosaurs may have developed longer necks to dart and snatch prey from a distance, and sharks adapted strategies of endurance and scavenging, in part to exploit the kills of mosasaurs. They were, in many ways, architects of their environment, apex predators whose presence forced everything else to change. And yet, for all their supremacy, they too were vulnerable to larger rivals, to disease, to the shifting tides of an unstable sea. Fossil evidence from the Niobrara Formation shows mosasaurs preserved with injuries, with bite marks from sharks or rival mosasaurs, with broken bones that tell stories of battles survived or lost.
They lived lives of constant conflict, never immune from danger, despite their terrifying power. Hollywood has attempted to capture their image, most famously in films like Jurassic World, but even those dramatic portrayals fall short of reality. For in truth, the Mosasaur was not a simple monster. It was a creature of elegance, with sleek lines, powerful musculature, and behaviors fine-tuned by millions of years of evolution. To imagine meeting one is to imagine staring into the eyes of a predator that has never once known fear, only hunger. You would see intelligence there, not the mammalian intelligence of a dolphin, but the cold, calculating awareness of a reptile that has learned over countless generations how to strike, how to kill, and how to dominate. And in that moment, as its jaws open wide and the abyss swallows the light around you, you would finally understand what it meant to live in the Western Interior Seaway, a place where no creature was safe, and where even the rulers swam in constant peril. So ponder this. If power itself could not shield the Mosasaurs from fear, from injury, from death, what hope would any smaller creature, or even we, ever have had in their ocean?
In the shadow of the Mosasaur's dominance, there lurked another titan of the Western Interior Seaway, a predator that preferred patience over speed and ambush over pursuit, the Crocodilian known as Deinosuchus, whose name translates literally to terrible crocodile. To modernize, crocodiles are already fearsome enough. Their armored hides, bone-crushing jaws, and explosive ambushes making them among the most efficient predators alive today. But Deinosuchus was no ordinary crocodile. Fossil evidence suggests it grew to lengths of 35 to 40 feet, and some estimates even propose individuals that may have reached over 50 feet, rivaling the length of a city bus and weighing up to 10 tons. David Schwimmer, in King of the Crocodilians, The Paleobiology of Deinosuchus, 2002, describes its skull as 6 feet long, lined with teeth thicker than soda cans, built not to slice like a shark, but to crush bone and shell with unbelievable force. Imagine standing on the shoreline of the Seaway as herds of hadrosaurs wander down to drink from its waters, unaware that beneath the muddy surface a giant reptile lies perfectly still, its nostrils just breaking the waterline. In an instant, the calm explodes. Deinosuchus lunges upward, its jaws snapping shut with a sound like a thunderclap, seizing a 30-foot dinosaur by the neck and dragging it thrashing into the depths. The water churns red, waves crash against the bank, and within moments, silence returns. Only ripples remain. For dinosaurs that lived near its shores, and for any reptile or fish bold enough to drift into its strike zone, Deinosuchus was less an animal than a force of nature, a reminder that danger did not only come from the open sea. And so, as you picture those primeval waters lapping at your feet, ask yourself, would you have dared to drink from them, knowing that something unseen might be waiting with jaws wide enough to crush you in half?
The terror of Deinosuchus lay not just in its size, but in the sheer mechanical power of its bite. Modern saltwater crocodiles, the largest living representatives of their family, are capable of exerting bite forces exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch, enough to shatter bone like kindling. But studies of Deinosuchus fossils suggest a bite force of over 18,000 pounds per square inch, more than 4 times that of its modern kin, and strong enough to crush the carapace of giant sea turtles or puncture the armor of dinosaurs. Broku, in Phylogenetic Relationships of Crocodiliforms, 2003, highlights how its blunt, conical teeth were uniquely adapted for such feats, acting less like daggers and more like sledgehammers.
This made Deinosuchus an apex predator not just of the shorelines, but of the boundary between land and sea. It could wait silently in brackish estuaries, concealed in mud and reeds, striking at unsuspecting prey with a suddenness so violent that survival was almost impossible. Imagine a hadrosaur lowering its head to graze, the sun glinting off the ripples nearby, when the water suddenly erupts in froth. A massive reptilian head, armored and ancient, surges upward. The jaws clamp around the dinosaur's torso, and before it can scream or thrash, it is dragged into the seaway's depths. There, the predator performs its infamous death roll, spinning its bulk with terrifying speed, ripping flesh from bone in spirals of red water. But Deinosuchus did not only feed on dinosaurs. Fossils show it targeted sea turtles, giant fish, and perhaps even juvenile mosasaurs, its crushing jaws capable of delivering fatal blows to creatures that most predators avoided. The Western Interior Seaway was full of monsters, but Deinosuchus ruled a unique kingdom, the liminal space between river and ocean, between land and water, between safety and sudden death. And in that shadowed realm, the question becomes unavoidable. If you lived as a dinosaur on those ancient plains, would you have feared the mosasaurs of the sea, or the unseen jaws that lurked in silence along the shore?
What makes Deinosuchus even more chilling is not only its power, but its persistence as a design. Crocodilians are often called living fossils because their basic form has changed so little in over 80 million years, a testimony to how perfect their bodies already were. Deinosuchus thrived for millions of years in the Cretaceous, outliving many of its contemporaries and shaping ecosystems as both predator and scavenger. Schwimmer 2002 notes that some individuals may have lived as long as 50 years, steadily growing larger with age, meaning the older they became, the more unstoppable they were. A 10-ton elder lying in wait along a riverbank was less a hunter and more a natural disaster, capable of killing anything that entered its domain. Imagine crouching in the reeds of that ancient shore, watching silently as herds of dinosaurs pass, birds wheel overhead, and the water lies still. Beneath that stillness is a reptile older than the mountains, patient as stone, waiting for the moment to strike. Unlike mosasaurs, which depended on ambush in open water, Deinosuchus had mastered ambush in transition zones, striking not only from concealment, but from inevitability. Even the mighty mosasaurs and sharks avoided shallow estuaries when Deinosuchus was near, for its jaws could rival their own. And yet, despite its dominance, it eventually disappeared, likely due to climate changes and the retreat of the Western Interior Seaway, which shrank its hunting grounds. Its descendants, however, endure, reduced in size, but still formidable, still ambushing, still dragging prey into silence. When we look into the unblinking eyes of a modern crocodile today, half submerged in a swamp, we are staring into eyes that have watched the rise and fall of empires of monsters. They remind us that the most terrifying designs of evolution are not always the largest or the loudest, but the most patient. And so I leave you with this thought. If patience itself can be a weapon, sharpened by millions of years, then what defense could any creature, then or now, ever have against the jaws that wait in silence?
Long before human sailors ever whispered about sea monsters in dimly lit taverns, long before Norse legends carved the Kraken into cultural memory, Earth's oceans already held cephalopods of astonishing size and power. In the Western Interior Seaway, these tentacled beings lived alongside mosasaurs, sharks, and plesiosaurs. Yet their rule was unique, for they combined strength with cunning.
Fossils of ammonites, spiral-shelled relatives of squids and octopuses, show us creatures that were more than drifting shells. Some ammonites grew 6 feet across, their shells iridescent like giant nautiluses, their tentacles reaching outward to seize fish and small reptiles. Then there were the belemnites, squid-like predators whose bullet-shaped internal shells tell us they could reach lengths over 15 feet. D.M. Martill, in Fossils of the Oxford Clay, 1991, describes these as swift, efficient hunters that filled the oceans with both beauty and fear. Imagine yourself as a small fish, darting nervously through plankton-rich waters. You sense movement behind you, but cannot see clearly in the green haze. Suddenly, a coil of muscle lashes out. Hooks dig into your side, pulling you backward against your frantic thrashing. The world narrows to a sharp beak descending toward your body, slicing into flesh like shears through fabric. The cephalopod's tentacles tighten, dragging you into the darkness, where your life ends before you understand what has claimed it. These predators were not myths. They were real, abundant, and capable of hunting in silence. The legends of Krakens might exaggerate their size, but the foundation of those myths lies here, in creatures with too many arms, too many ways to kill, and too much intelligence for comfort. And so I ask, if you had lived in that age, would you have feared the obvious monsters with jaws and teeth, or the silent hunters whose many limbs reached out from the shadows?
Modern oceans still hide giants that echo those ancient hunters. The giant squid, Architeuthis ducks, rarely seen alive, can grow to nearly 45 feet in length, its eyes the size of dinner plates, the largest of any animal known. Its cousin, the colossal squid, Mesonichitithis hamiltoni, is even more formidable, with swiveling hooks on its tentacles and a bulk so massive it outweighs most sharks. Richard Ellis, in The Search for the Giant Squid, 1998, gathered centuries of sailor accounts describing immense squids rising from the depths, attacking ships or grappling with whales. Imagine those same traits scaled back through time into the Western Interior Seaway, where prey was larger, more diverse, and competition even fiercer. Ammonites and belemnites may not have reached the extremes of modern colossal squids, but their ecological role was just as dramatic. They attacked swiftly, with suction cups lined by serrated rings, and tore into their victims with beaks as sharp as shears. Fossil evidence reveals ammonite shells scarred by mosasaur bites, but also mosasaur bones with strange circular gouges that some paleontologists interpret as possible cephalopod attack marks. Mark McManaman's controversial paper Triassic Kraken, 2011, even proposed that giant cephalopods killed marine reptiles and arranged their bones, though many disagree. Yet, whether or not they killed mosasaurs, these animals were far from harmless. Picture a mosasaur lunging into a shoal of fish, scattering them like silver rain, only to feel its tail wrapped by an unseen arm. Another tentacle fastens to its flipper, suckers digging deep, while a beak bites into tender muscle. The reptile thrashes violently, snapping jaws, rolling in desperation. Perhaps it escapes, bleeding, but the terror of that moment would linger. Even the mightiest predators were not beyond the grasp of tentacled hunters. In an ocean of monsters, power was not enough. Intelligence, patience, and stealth created dangers far more insidious. So think carefully. Would you rather fight an enemy you could see charging, or one hidden below, waiting with arms outstretched?
What separates cephalopods from other predators of the seaway is not merely their weapons, but their minds. Unlike reptiles, driven largely by instinct, cephalopods demonstrate behaviors that border on problem-solving. Modern octopuses open jars, camouflage with precision, and even use tools. Jennifer Mather, in Octopus, the Ocean's Intelligent Invertebrate, 2010, explains that their nervous systems are distributed, with neurons not just in the head, but in the arms, granting each limb a degree of autonomy. Imagine such a system magnified into a creature the size of a truck, operating with coordination, patience, and cunning. In the Western Interior Seaway, they would have blended with the chalky seafloor until prey wandered close. Then, without warning, tentacles would surge upward, ensnaring victims in a web of muscle. Picture yourself suspended in murky water, the faint light fading as you descend. The seafloor looks motionless until it moves. Sediment shifts, shapes ripple, and suddenly arms coil around your legs. Another arm binds your chest, squeezing as you fight for breath. A massive eye opens in the gloom, reflecting your final thrash. And in that gaze, you sense awareness, not blind hunger, but strategy. The beak closes, and everything ends. Stories of Krakens may seem like sailor exaggerations, but perhaps they echo an older truth, a whisper of memory carried through time, that the oceans once held creatures whose intelligence made them as terrifying as their size. And so, as you ponder these ancient hunters, ask yourself, in a world where tentacles could think, strike, and plan, what chance would any creature, reptile, fish, or human, truly have had to escape?
Sharks are among the oldest survivors on Earth, having swum in the oceans for more than 400 million years, long before the first dinosaur ever walked on land, and long before flowering plants painted the continents with color. Yet the sharks that inhabited the Western Interior Seaway were not the same as the great whites or tiger sharks we know today. They were larger, heavier, faster, and in many ways far stranger, perfectly suited to an environment where prey was abundant, but competition was savage. The king among them was Crocodilian mentelli, nicknamed the Jinsu shark because of the sharp knife-like quality of its teeth. Fossil evidence suggests it could reach lengths of 20 to 25 feet, making it similar in size to a modern great white, but its build was bulkier, its musculature denser, and its hunting strategies more aggressive. Kenshu Shimada, in his monograph The Late Cretaceous Lamniform Shark Crocodilian mentelli, 1997, documented multiple specimens with teeth marks matching injuries on mosasaur bones, suggesting that this shark did not shy away from attacking even the apex reptiles of the seaway. Imagine the scene. A 25-foot Crocodilian patrolling silently through the green haze of plankton-rich waters. Ahead, a juvenile mosasaur swims, confident in its own size and speed. Then, in a blur of motion, the shark surges forward, jaws snapping into its flank with serrated blades designed to slice flesh like butter. Blood erupts in clouds, smaller fish scatter in panic, and the mosasaur thrashes desperately. But the shark does not need to win the battle instantly. Like modern great whites, it bites once, cripples its prey, and then follows relentlessly, circling, waiting for weakness to set in. The predator's patience ensures the outcome. The reptile bleeds, slows, and finally succumbs. What's left is not a clean kill, but a prolonged execution, a reminder that sharks are not just hunters of opportunity, but strategists of survival. Their efficiency was terrifying because it was inevitable. In an ocean filled with monsters, Crocodilian carved its place by being not the largest, but the most relentless.
And so the question must be asked, if you were caught bleeding in those waters with a shadow circling ever closer, would you have fought to the last breath, or would you have surrendered to the inevitable bite of the shark?
Fossil evidence from the chalk beds of Kansas paints a gruesome but fascinating portrait of Krakatoxerina's reign of terror in the Western Interior Seaway, a reign that lasted for millions of years and left scars not only in the bones of its prey, but in the very fabric of the ecosystem it ruled. In several spectacular discoveries, paleontologists have found mosasaur skeletons riddled with crescent-shaped tooth marks that perfectly match the serrated dentition of Krakatoxerina. One specimen, described by Michael Everhart in Oceans of Kansas 2005, even preserves a vertebra with a shark tooth still embedded deep within it, frozen in stone as testimony to a predator that attacked without hesitation. Such fossils tell us that this shark was no scavenger lurking on the edges of the food chain. It was an apex hunter willing to gamble against the very giants of its age. Picture the clash. A young Thalassophobia swims confidently near the surface, its body gliding with the elegance of a reptilian torpedo, when suddenly a shadow streaks upward from below. In an instant, teeth sink into its side, tearing through muscle and bone with surgical precision. The reptile whips its massive tail in panic, driving the shark back, but blood floods the water, and the wound is mortal. Krakatoxerina withdraws, not in defeat, but in certainty, circling just beyond sight. Hours pass, the mosasaur slows, and when exhaustion conquers strength, the shark returns to finish what it began. This is the terrifying brilliance of shark predation, victory not through brute force, but through endurance, patience, and inevitability. And Krakatoxerina was not alone. Other sharks prowled the seaway, each adding new layers of dread. Squalocorax, nicknamed the crow shark, acted as both hunter and scavenger, its smaller size offset by sheer numbers and boldness. Teeth of Squalocorax have been found embedded not only in marine reptiles, but in the bones of dinosaurs washed out to sea, proof that no carcass was safe from their serrated jaws. Even Hybotus, a more ancient lineage of shark with spiny fins like natural weapons, persisted in these waters, a reminder of how deep the evolutionary roots of this group extend. Imagine a carcass of a hadrosaur, swept into the seaway by floods, its bulk drifting helplessly beneath the waves. Within hours, it would be torn apart by dozens of sharks, each bite reducing a land giant into a feast for the sea. This recycling of death into sustenance is the essence of the ocean's food chain, and in the Western Interior Seaway, sharks were the unrelenting middlemen of nature's economy. Their dominance was so absolute that even the bones of mosasaurs, those kings of the water, bear silent witness to the reality that in this ocean, nothing swam without risk of becoming prey. And so we must wonder, if even the rulers of the sea could be worn down, stalked, and consumed by the patience of sharks, what hope would anything smaller, be it fish, reptile, or even an unfortunate time-traveling human, ever truly have had?
What makes the story of these sharks most haunting is not simply their size or their teeth, but the reality that they are among the greatest survivors Earth has ever produced, enduring cataclysms that destroyed nearly every other monster we have spoken of so far, outlasting extinction events, and continuing to prowl the oceans today as living echoes of an ancient nightmare. Sharks first appeared more than 400 million years ago, and while the mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, ammonites, and even the mighty Deinosuchus eventually vanished forever, sharks adapted, shrank when they had to, grew when food was abundant, and diversified into forms that filled every niche the sea provided. Kenshu Shimada's work on Krakatoxerina menteli, 1997,
demonstrates that this shark's lineage did not continue into modern species, but its ecological role lives on in mako sharks and great whites, sleek hunters whose endurance and efficiency mirror their Cretaceous ancestor. Think about that for a moment. While the giant reptiles that once terrorized the Western Interior Seaway are known only from fossils locked in chalk, their shark contemporaries still swim in our seas today, reminding us that some designs are too perfect to disappear. Imagine standing on a modern boat, leaning over the railing to look into the dark blue below, your heartbeat rising as you catch a glimpse of a dorsal fin slicing the water. That fear is not new. It is a memory older than humanity, etched into the bones of mammals and reptiles alike, an instinct born from millions of years of being prey to sharks that never stopped hunting. Picture yourself in the Cretaceous Seaway, floating helplessly at the surface. Below you circles a Cretoxarina, larger than a modern great white, faster than any tuna, hungrier than you can comprehend. You cannot outswim it, cannot outfight it, and cannot hide in an ocean without refuge. It does not need to rush. It simply waits, circling in silence until you weaken, until panic drains your energy, until survival slips away. That is the essence of shark terror, inevitability. They do not merely kill, they wear down hope itself. And as we reflect on this, it is no wonder that humans, even today, feel their pulse quicken at the mere idea of sharks, because deep in our evolutionary past, the oceans belonged to them. They remain one of nature's most enduring designs, proof that in the long history of predators, patience and persistence often matter more than brute force or towering size. And so, as you think of the Western Interior Seaway and its endless parade of monsters, ask yourself, is it possible that the most terrifying creature of all was not the giant mosasaur or the colossal crocodile, but the shark that never stopped swimming, never stopped killing, and never stopped reminding us that in the ocean, fear is eternal?
In a sea already dominated by mosasaurs with their bone-crushing jaws, sharks with their serrated knives, and crocodilians with their thunderous ambushes, it might seem strange to focus on a fish, something not armored like a reptile or cunning like a cephalopod. Yet the Western Interior Seaway was home to a predator so grotesque, so aggressive, and so relentless that even without reptilian bulk or shark-like grace, it earned a place among the most feared monsters of its time. That creature was Xiphactinus audax, a bony fish that could grow to over 20 feet long, with a skull shaped like a spearhead and a mouth filled with needle-like fangs designed for stabbing and holding slippery prey. Michael Everhart in Oceans of Kansas 2005 famously described it as the bulldog of the late Cretaceous seas, a creature driven not by elegance but by raw hunger. One of the most striking fossils ever discovered, a specimen preserved in the Sternberg Museum in Kansas, shows a 13-foot Xiphactinus with an entire 6-foot Gillicus fish inside its ribcage, swallowed whole. Paleontologists believe the meal was so large it either suffocated the predator or ruptured its gut, killing it almost instantly. Imagine the voracity required for an animal to attempt swallowing prey nearly half its size, knowing that the risk of death was high. That fossil, often called the fish within a fish, is a monument not to caution but to reckless appetite, an image of hunger so overwhelming it overpowered survival instinct itself. Picture yourself drifting in those chalky waters, watching a massive silver form dart into a school of fish. It lunges not for the weak or the small, but for the largest target, jaws snapping shut with a sickening crunch. Then, with a grotesque gulp, it swallows the thrashing prey whole, its belly distending unnaturally, its body writhing as the trapped fish struggles inside. To witness such a scene would be to realize that sometimes the most terrifying predator is not the largest or smartest,
but the one so consumed by appetite it kills itself in the act of feeding. And so I ask you, in an ocean full of cunning hunters, would you not fear most the one that devours without hesitation, even when death is the price of its gluttony?
If the fossilized fish within a fish specimen immortalized Xiphactinus as a reckless glutton, the broader fossil record cements its reputation as a relentless predator that thrived not through subtlety or intelligence, but through sheer aggression and speed. Its body was shaped like a torpedo, streamlined for sudden bursts of velocity, with massive fins that allowed it to dart into schools of prey like a silver missile. Unlike mosasaurs that ambushed from the gloom, or sharks that circled patiently, Xiphactinus was the kind of hunter that exploded into view, a brute force sprinter that struck terror in everything smaller than itself. Kenshu Shimada, in Fossil Fishes of the Western Interior Seaway, 2015, highlights how the distribution of Xiphactinus remains across Kansas and surrounding regions suggest it was not a rare oddity, but a widespread terror, abundant enough to dominate multiple layers of the food chain. Imagine being a small marine reptile or seabird gliding peacefully above the surface. Without warning, the water erupts as a 20-foot fish surges upward, its gaping mouth rimmed with long fangs, snapping shut around you before you even realize you were prey. Fossil evidence even hints that Xiphactinus may have attacked juvenile mosasaurs, whether as opportunistic strikes or scavenging their carcasses. In one vivid reconstruction, paleontologists envision a scene where a juvenile reptile separated from its mother swims desperately through the seaway's shallow waters, only to be rammed by a speeding Xiphactinus whose jaws drive into its flank. The reptile thrashes, tail lashing foam, but the fish's grip is iron, and soon the battle is lost. This was not an intelligent hunt, not a calculated strategy. It was pure savagery, a predator that attacked because it could and devoured because hunger drove it to. Schools of smaller fish must have panicked when Xiphactinus appeared, scattering in silver waves of terror. Even sharks may have ceded ground to this brute when it charged, for its teeth could puncture scales, and its sheer mass gave it dominance in sudden clashes. To visualize it is to imagine a sea where the line between hunter and hunted was blurred, because even if you were a predator, if you were smaller or weaker, you could still fall victim to this relentless beast. Its ugliness lay not only in its grotesque appearance, its long, fang-filled jaws and soulless eyes, but in its absolute lack of restraint. Where mosasaurs calculated ambush and cephalopods deployed intelligence, Xiphactinus killed with immediacy, never hesitating, never relenting. And so I leave you with this thought. In a world where hesitation meant death, would you rather face a cunning predator that stalks and waits, or a savage brute that kills instantly, leaving you no time even to scream? What ultimately made Xiphactinus so nightmarish was not only its grotesque appearance or reckless feeding habits, but its sheer persistence across millions of years as one of the dominant predators of the Western Interior Seaway, an animal that seemed to embody the principle that brutality itself could be a winning evolutionary strategy. Fossils of Xiphactinus are found across an enormous geographic range, from Kansas to Texas to South Dakota, and even into Europe, indicating it was not just a regional oddity, but a global menace that adapted to nearly every marine environment it encountered. Its survival strategy was brutally simple: attack, devour, repeat. There was no elegance to its hunting style, no subtle dance of predator and prey. Instead, it relied on speed, strength, and an insatiable appetite that pushed it to consume meals too large for its stomach to handle, sometimes leading to its own death. And yet, despite such recklessness, it flourished for millions of years, leaving layer upon layer of fossilized skeletons in the chalk beds that now blanket the American Midwest. Imagine drifting through those waters as a small fish or a seabird, the sun filtering faintly above you, when suddenly
A massive shadow flashes past, jaws yawning open like a steel trap, rows of needle teeth flashing in the dim light. You have no time to react. There is no hiding, no escape route, because Xiphactinus does not stalk or wait. It simply arrives and consumes, reducing your world to darkness inside its belly. Even among paleontologists, there is debate about whether Xiphactinus should be considered among the most dangerous of all seaway predators, because it lacked the size of Mosasaurs or the stealth of sharks. Yet, when one considers the ecological evidence, the sheer number of remains, the frequency of fossilized prey inside their rib cages, the destructive power of their jaws, the conclusion becomes clear. This was a fish that ruled by terror and terror alone. In Jennifer Everhart's synthesis in Oceans of Kansas, A Natural History of the Western Interior Sea, 2005, she notes that Xiphactinus was not only among the largest bony fishes of its time, but also among the most aggressive, an animal that left a legacy of fear etched into the fossil record itself. To gaze upon its fossil skull today, with its fang-lined mouth frozen in a permanent snarl, is to glimpse not only the bones of a long-dead predator, but the embodiment of hunger, unchecked by reason, appetite untamed by caution. And perhaps that is the true horror of Xiphactinus, not that it was the biggest, or the smartest, or the most efficient, but that it was a living engine of consumption, devouring until it perished, surviving not through balance, but through excess. In a modern world where we often praise intelligence and subtlety, the fossilized grin of Xiphactinus reminds us that sometimes raw brutality can carry a species through the ages, even if it leaves behind nothing but bones and terror. And so I ask you, as you imagine those chalk seas filled with monsters of every kind, would you have feared the cunning of cephalopods, the jaws of sharks, or the mindless ferocity of a fish so reckless it would swallow you whole without a second thought, even if it meant choking itself to death?
Among all the sea monsters of the Western Interior Seaway, few capture the imagination quite like the Plesiosaurs, those long-necked, almost dragon-like reptiles whose eerie forms have inspired countless myths and even modern-day legends of lake monsters like the Loch Ness creature. Yet in reality, Plesiosaurs were not mythical apparitions, but flesh and blood predators that thrived in oceans for over 135 million years, surviving from the Triassic through the end of the Cretaceous. Their design was unmistakable. Broad, barrel-shaped bodies, 4 powerful flippers that moved in an almost wing-like rhythm, allowing them to fly underwater with uncanny grace, and, in some species, necks that stretched impossibly long, like serpentine stalks probing through the water. Paleontologist Richard Ellis, in his book Sea Dragons, Predators of the Prehistoric Oceans, 2003, describes plesiosaurs as the strangest animals ever to inhabit the sea. And when one looks at their fossils, it is easy to see why. Imagine yourself floating in the shallow, chalky waters of the seaway when suddenly you glimpse a shadow gliding beneath you. Its movement is silent, almost ghostly, the 4 flippers sweeping in slow synchrony as though the animal is weightless. Then, out of the murk, its neck extends upward, a narrow skull filled with sharp interlocking teeth snapping around a struggling fish, before retreating back down into the depths. The elegance of this hunt is deceptive, for behind the grace lies lethal efficiency. Plesiosaurs were ambush predators, relying not on brute force, but on stealth, striking suddenly with whip-like necks to snatch prey that never saw the attack coming.
Picture dozens of them, swimming in loose pods, weaving gracefully through the water like underwater swans, yet armed with jaws capable of shredding flesh in an instant. Their very appearance must have been alien, even horrifying, to anything that lived alongside them. Not reptiles in the sense of crocodiles or lizards, but something altogether unique, as if evolution had experimented with blending birds, reptiles, and serpents into one surreal form. If you had been a fish or a small marine reptile in those waters, your worst fear may not have been the obvious bulk of a mosasaur charging from the shadows, but the silent, unearthly glide of a plesiosaur rising beneath you, jaws snapping shut in perfect silence. And so one has to wonder, in a sea of giants, would it not be the strangest and eeriest forms, the ones that did not fit our natural expectations, that truly haunted the imagination of prey and predator alike?
The fossil record of the Western Interior Seaway provides hauntingly vivid evidence of just how successful plesiosaurs were as predators, despite competing against mosasaurs, sharks, and other ferocious marine reptiles. Their unusual body plan, once thought to be ungainly, is now understood as one of nature's most efficient designs for maneuverability. Studies, such as those by paleontologist Adam S. Smith in Plesiosaurs, Reconstructing the Marine Reptile Family, 2010, show that the unique four-flipper arrangement allowed plesiosaurs to fly underwater in a way no other animal has managed before or since, with the front flippers providing thrust and the back flippers adding steering precision. Imagine watching one in action, its body almost still, flippers sweeping gracefully in perfect rhythm, allowing it to hover in the water like a bird suspended in air. Then, in an instant, its long neck lashes forward, jaws snapping shut around an unsuspecting fish, which disappears into its gullet before the victim even comprehends the strike. The mechanics of this attack were terrifying because they gave no warning. There was no rush of water, no shadowed bulk bearing down, just the sudden emergence of a slender, snake-like neck from the gloom. Fossilized stomach contents confirm this hunting style, with remains of fish and squid-like cephalopods found in the rib cages of plesiosaurs, evidence of quick, repeated strikes rather than large battles with giant prey. Yet not all plesiosaurs had long necks. Some, like the pliosaurs, had shorter, more muscular necks and massive heads filled with crushing jaws, making them more like reptilian orca whales than serpentine stalkers. In this diversity, plesiosaurs filled multiple niches in the seaway ecosystem, from swift fish snatchers to apex predators capable of tackling prey nearly their own size. Imagine the terror of a smaller marine reptile cornered by such a beast, twisting desperately, flippers thrashing, but unable to match the agility of its attacker. Even mosasaurs may have fallen victim to ambushes by larger pliosaurs, whose bite force could rival that of Tyrannosaurus rex on land. In this way, plesiosaurs were not merely strange-looking oddities, but powerful players in a brutal food chain. Their fossils, beautifully articulated in chalk beds from Kansas to Manitoba, tell us they were not rare visitors, but abundant rulers of their realm. To see one mounted in a museum today, its impossibly long neck arcing above the skeleton of its barrel chest, is to realize just how alien the oceans of the past once were. And it forces us to ask, if evolution could create such bizarre and effective predators once, could it not do so again, shaping future oceans into worlds just as strange as the Cretaceous seas that plesiosaurs haunted?
Perhaps what makes plesiosaurs most unforgettable is not simply their eerie anatomy or their predatory success, but the way they bridge the gap between scientific reality and human imagination, becoming creatures that linger in folklore and myth long after their extinction.
When we hear about the Loch Ness Monster or other legendary lake serpents, what we are really encountering is the ghost of plesiosaurs, their strange outlines etched so deeply into our cultural memory that they reappear centuries after their bones turn to stone. This connection is no accident. In Sea Dragons, Ellis, 2003, the author notes that Plesiosaur's silhouette, with its long neck arching out of the water, small head perched at the end like a watchful serpent, fits perfectly with the stories of mysterious creatures surfacing in lakes and seas around the world. It is as if our species, staring at the alien proportions of their skeletons, could not help but weave them into tales of the uncanny. Yet the reality of their existence in the Western Interior Seaway was no fairy tale. It was a theater of survival, where every ripple in the water might conceal a predator that moved with ghost-like silence. Imagine sitting in a canoe, if such a thing could exist in that age, your small craft drifting across waters that stretch to the horizon. The waves are calm, the sun warm. Suddenly, the water bulges upward and a long neck bursts forth, dripping with seawater, its head snapping toward you with impossible speed. You would not even have time to scream before teeth closed around your body, dragging you down into the chalky deep. To creatures of that ancient ocean, such encounters were not legend, but daily terror. Fossils reveal that plesiosaurs themselves bore the scars of this world. Bite marks on bones, shattered ribs from battles with mosasaurs, and even fused vertebrae showing signs of injuries that healed, proof they too were hunted even as they hunted others. This duality, the hunter always at risk of becoming prey, was the essence of the seaway ecosystem. Yet unlike mosasaurs or sharks, plesiosaurs embody a strangeness that continues to unsettle us. Their design seems almost unnatural, as though stitched together from multiple creatures. And still, evolution kept them alive for more than 100 million years, longer than most dynasties of predators. To study them is to confront a humbling truth. Survival does not always belong to the familiar or the ordinary, but often to the strange and the improbable. And so, as we leave behind the image of these long-necked dragons gliding silently through the chalk seas, we must ask ourselves, when we tell stories of monsters lurking in the depths today, are we simply echoing an ancient memory, a subconscious whisper passed down through time from ancestors who once lived in awe and fear of the real plesiosaurs that ruled Earth's forgotten oceans?
The Western Interior Seaway, once home to mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, giant sharks, and monstrous fish like Scyphactinus, eventually vanished, and with it went the terrifying parade of ocean predators that had haunted its waters for millions of years. But why did these creatures disappear? When sharks survived, crocodilians endured, and turtles swam on into the modern age. The answer lies in a combination of climate change, shifting continents, and above all, the catastrophic asteroid impact that struck the Yucatan Peninsula 66 million years ago, unleashing a chain of events so destructive that nearly all large marine reptiles were driven to extinction. Picture the scene. For millions of years, the seaway had stretched like a warm inland ocean across North America, teeming with life. Then, as the continents shifted, the seaway gradually shallowed and narrowed, its ecosystems fragmenting. According to Donald E. Fastovsky and David B. Weishampel in The Evolution and Extinction of the Dinosaurs, 2005, the regression of the seas reduced habitat space for giant marine reptiles, squeezing them into smaller, more competitive zones where food became scarce. Into this fragile balance came the asteroid, an object 6 miles wide slamming into Earth with the force of billions of nuclear bombs. Fires raged, shockwaves shattered landscapes, and tsunamis surged across the seaway itself. More devastating still was the global darkness that followed, as dust and aerosols filled the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and collapsing food chains from plankton upward.
For creatures like Mosasaurs and Plesiosaurs, who relied on abundant fish and squid to fuel their massive bodies, starvation came swiftly. Fossil evidence shows a sharp decline in marine reptile diversity at the very end of the Cretaceous, coinciding almost perfectly with the impact event. Imagine being one of the last plesiosaurs, gliding through waters that had once been crowded with prey, now eerily empty. Your long neck craning through shadows in search of food that is no longer there. Hunger gnaws at your belly. Exhaustion slows your flippers, and as days turn to weeks, your kind fades from the world, never to return. Meanwhile, smaller, more adaptable creatures, sharks, rays, teleost fish, continue on, their flexibility giving them the edge in a world suddenly hostile to giants. And so, the monsters vanish, their bones entombed in chalk, leaving us to wonder, if such mighty rulers of the seas could disappear so completely, what hope does any apex predator truly have against the endless march of Earth's changing fate?
While the asteroid impact often takes center stage in discussions about extinction, the decline of the great marine reptiles had already begun before the cataclysmic day when fire rained from the skies. For millions of years, the Western Interior Seaway had been shrinking, its warm, shallow waters draining away as tectonic forces raised the Rocky Mountains and the interior seas retreated toward the Gulf of Mexico. This slow geological transformation fragmented ecosystems that had once been interconnected, creating isolated basins where food webs became unstable. Mosasaurs and Plesiosaurs, once lords of vast inland oceans, suddenly found themselves restricted to narrower hunting grounds, competing not only with each other, but also with increasingly sophisticated fish and sharks. Fossil evidence compiled by Michael J. Everhart in Oceans of Kansas 2005 shows a gradual shift in predator-prey dynamics in the last few million years of the Cretaceous, with marine reptiles showing signs of nutritional stress. Smaller, faster teleost fish began to dominate the seas, fish that could evade the lunges of slower predators or thrive in new niches. In a sense, evolution was already favoring agility and adaptability over brute size and dominance. Imagine standing on the chalk cliffs of Kansas as the seaway receded, where once you might have seen a horizon dotted with shadows of giant reptiles surfacing for breath. Now the water seemed thinner, emptier, filled with smaller swarms of fish rather than colossal monsters. A lone Xiphactinus darts beneath the waves, but its kind, too, is dwindling, losing ground to new competitors. Above, marine birds wheel and dive, their aerial perspective giving them an advantage in hunting schools of fish near the surface, an evolutionary preview of the seabirds that still dominate oceans today. The world was changing, subtly but inexorably, and the giants were poorly equipped to adapt. They were specialists, powerful, terrifying, but inflexible. When their food sources dwindled or their habitats fractured, they had little recourse but to die out. Contrast this with sharks, which had already survived multiple extinction events by shifting diets, adjusting body sizes, and exploiting whatever ecological niches remained. The truth is almost cruel. The monsters of the Cretaceous seas were undone not only by sudden catastrophe, but by the slow erosion of their dominance, death by 1,000 evolutionary cuts. Their extinction reminds us that even before the asteroid ended their reign, they were already ghosts in the making, fighting a losing battle against a changing world. And it raises a haunting question. In today's oceans, filled with whales, sharks, and massive squids, which of our modern giants are already marked by the quiet handwriting of extinction, waiting only for the final push to vanish forever?
In the end, the disappearance of the great sea monsters was not simply a tale of destruction, but a lesson in the impermanence of dominance.
a reminder that even the fiercest predators can be swept away by forces beyond their control. After the asteroid struck and the skies darkened, the ocean's surface cooled. Phytoplankton populations collapsed, and the food web unraveled from the bottom up. For animals like Plesiosaurs and Mosasaurs, whose massive bodies demanded enormous daily intakes of prey, this collapse was fatal. They starved as the seas grew barren, their skeletons sinking into the sea floor to be entombed in chalk. Yet in that very moment of devastation, opportunity arose for other creatures. Sharks and rays, smaller and more adaptable, weathered the crisis by consuming whatever prey survived, from invertebrates to carrion. Turtles, too, endured, their slower metabolisms and broad diets giving them resilience against famine. Even crocodilians managed to survive, hiding in rivers and estuaries, their ability to go long periods without food proving decisive. The extinction of the sea monsters was therefore not total death in the oceans, but a reshuffling of the deck, where flexibility triumphed over size and specialization. Picture the scene millions of years later. The seaway is gone, replaced by prairies and rivers, its ancient chalk beds littered with the bones of giants. Above these bones graze bison, and later still, humans quarry the rocks to build cities, unaware that beneath their feet lie the remains of a lost ocean filled with nightmares. Today, when we stare at a fossil mosasaur mounted in a museum or trace the long arc of a plesiosaur's neck in stone, we are not only seeing the past, we are witnessing a warning. Dominance does not guarantee survival, and every ruler of Earth's ecosystems carries within it the seeds of its eventual decline. Our oceans today host blue whales, great white sharks, and giant squids, creatures that inspire awe much as mosasaurs and plesiosaurs once did. Yet their future is no more secure than the giants of the chalk seas. Climate change, acidification, and human exploitation erode their habitats much as tectonics and asteroids once eroded the seaway. And so, when we ask where all the sea monsters went, the answer is not only they died, but also they remind us of what can be lost. The monsters are gone, but their lesson endures. Power without adaptability is fragile, and even the mightiest can vanish into silence. So I leave you with this question. When future generations look back at the fossils of our oceans, will they see whales, sharks, and squids as survivors? Or will they be remembered only as the last great monsters to vanish from the sea?
And so, as we bring this journey through the chalk seas and the monsters that haunted them to an end, we are left with a haunting awareness that the story of these vanished oceans is not merely about the creatures themselves, but about the deeper rhythms of life and death that govern our planet, rhythms that continue to shape the world we inhabit today. The Western Interior Seaway may now be nothing more than stone and memory, but in its time it was a stage upon which evolution experimented with some of the strangest and most terrifying forms ever conceived. Mosasaurs with serpentine bodies and bone-crushing jaws, plesiosaurs that glided like winged phantoms through the water, sharks swollen to monstrous sizes, and fish so ugly and ferocious they seemed like nightmares given flesh. Each of these creatures ruled in its own way, and each eventually fell, undone not by weakness, but by the merciless turn of Earth's cycles. Tectonic shifts, falling seas, climate upheavals, and finally a rock from the heavens that sealed their fate. Yet as we stand here now, millions of years later, staring at their fossilized remains, we cannot help but see a reflection of ourselves. Are we not, in some sense, the new rulers of the seas, shaping the fate of whales, sharks, coral reefs, and entire ecosystems with our actions? And if so, what lessons should we draw from the monsters that came before us? Perhaps it is that strength without adaptability leads to extinction, that dominance without balance is fragile, that even the greatest of Earth's creatures can vanish when the world they depend on collapses.
Imagine for a moment that you are standing at the edge of a cliff in Kansas, gazing down at layers of chalk where once swam entire civilizations of predators, and realize that the ground beneath your feet is built upon the bones of giants. What will future generations stand upon when they look back at us? Will they see oceans still alive with wonder, or only fossils and silence? The choice, in many ways, is ours. And so, as we close this tale of prehistoric oceans and their monsters, I invite you to reflect on the fragility of power, the inevitability of change, and the responsibility we carry as heirs to a planet shaped by cycles of creation and destruction. If you found this journey through Earth's forgotten seas both chilling and inspiring, consider subscribing to this channel for more explorations into the mysteries of history, science, and life itself. And perhaps take a moment to ask yourself, what kind of story will we leave behind in the fossil record of tomorrow?